It's annoying, but it's a bot, and it cannot go on any longer. Hang it up, flat screen. I would have dragged you regardless. Hi you guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be discussing the rise of James Charles' career. But first, today's video is sponsored by Audible. Audible basically is an app online community where you can listen to all types of audiobooks, but audiobooks is not the only thing that Audible offers. You can listen to podcasts, they have wellness programs, they have different comedies, just all types of things that you can get into if you were to join Audible. I have been listening to The Escape Room by Megan Golden. It is a thriller. It's like a psychological thriller, and it's so like great listening to it other than reading it in front of you because it makes things a lot creepier. It makes things a lot more intense. So I absolutely love it. Audible has just been the thing that I do. Like if I'm in the car, I go on road trips when I go to visit my parents in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I will just turn on an audio book and it will take me all 4 hours. And it's just, you feel more in the book. Like it feels like someone is like telling you a story. I love it so much. So if you want to try Audible, visit www.audible.com/Kenya and get a 30-day free trial, or text Kenya to 500 and start your free trial with Audible. You guys know I love Audible, and yeah, I thank you Audible so much for sponsoring this video. And yeah, head over to Audible, hit the link in my description or right here. Love you guys, and let's get into the video. Hi you guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be discussing the rise of James Charles, how James Charles' career started, and how James Charles got to be where he is today as one of the most followed people on YouTube, one of the biggest like influencers in the world, probably top 2 influencer in the world, and just how James Charles got here. The reason why I want to make a rise of James Charles video is because I made a downfall of Trisha Paytas, Tati Westbrook, and Shane Dawson video, and I don't believe James Charles' career is anywhere near the career trajectory of those 3 people. I think he is doing nothing but rising, and I think the way that James Charles rises is a very interesting way because there is another group of people who do the exact same thing that James Charles does, and James Charles is either taking a page out of their book or they're both just happen to be doing it. But I want to discuss how James Charles is able to gain subscribers, gain fans, and stay relevant for so long, doing the seemingly same things he's always been doing, and what makes him different from the rest of his YouTube peers. But anyways, James Charles hit the scene being the first cover boy. James Charles really got notoriety from a yearbook photo. A yearbook photo, by the way, later on we find out the whole story behind the yearbook photo probably wasn't true, but that doesn't matter. James Charles hits the scene with this yearbook photo, and it kind of catapults James Charles into being a beauty influencer. Let me tell you something, and I mean this, no tea, no shade, just facts. James Charles could not do makeup. James Charles could not do makeup. Talk about falling into a career. James Charles fell into being a beauty influencer. I think James Charles has admitted himself that he was not good at doing makeup. He just wasn't good at doing makeup. The yearbook story and him wearing makeup in the yearbook photo made it seem like, and then because we found out that story about the yearbook photo may or may not be true, it made James Charles seem like he could be a beauty influencer. And this is at the time of the rise of the beauty influencers, and males in the beauty space were getting a lot of notoriety. So James Charles being able to come in there and get some, get some recognition doing makeup really wasn't that hard because there wasn't a lot of people doing it, and makeup YouTube was on the rise. So there was a perfect place for him to slide on in there, and that is what James Charles did. But James Charles was not good at makeup. He will admit it. James Charles was on record talking about his old makeup looks. They were not good. But I don't think people ate up James Charles as a beauty influencer because he was good. I think James Charles just really liked Like, people just really like James Charles. Something gravitated them towards the James Charles brand. I don't know if it was personality. Now, me personally, I never watched any of James Charles' older videos. So, like, Block Eyebrow James Charles, I did not watch any of his videos. But that is where James Charles started. He was a cover boy, and he immediately catapulted into the spotlight. People knew who James Charles was. So, a lot of people on YouTube don't go through the same thing that James Charles went through. A lot of other people they get famous on YouTube, they have their little niche audience, and then they move on and get bigger opportunities. James Charles started big. But there is something that would label James Charles for the rest of his career. I have never seen a scandal do this to someone's career the way this scandal did to James Charles' career. James Charles and his Ebola tweet. So James Charles was already getting recognition. People knew who James Charles was. Now, here is the thing. When we talk about these influencers, we always have to talk about white privilege, because a lot of these white influencers get opportunities that people who aren't white do not get. And that is just period. It doesn't matter if they're the most deserving person in the world. Just off the thing that they have white skin, just because they have white skin, they are allotted opportunities that people who do not have white skin do not get. And James Charles being able to do what he did so quickly is 100% him being white. Him being white plays a huge part into it. So people already peeped the white privilege from the beginning. So James Charles' his best thing to do was stay out of drama, stay out of anything that anyone could use against him. But James Charles does not do that, baby, because James Charles puts up a tweet about going to Africa and hoping he does not catch Ebola. And that is when things with James Charles just went whoop. Because before, people already had an opinion on James Charles. People thought James Charles was annoying. People thought James Charles was getting opportunities he didn't deserve. And you can't quantify that. You can't tangibly prove any of that, right? You just have to say, we know James Charles has white privilege working for him. But the minute people have something to hold against you, they're going to hold it against you. And people are still holding this tweet against James Charles. So James Charles immediately went into the problematic influencer category. And this was I feel honestly the height of the problematic influencer. This is when it really was huge news, when you were problematic. And James Charles immediately went into the problematic influencer realm. People immediately labeled James Charles all types of things because of this tweet. And I don't think James Charles has ever been able to recover from being labeled that. There are people who still call James Charles all those labels because of that tweet. Because of that tweet, there's a lot of people who still don't mess with James Charles, who still every week a tweet goes viral of someone saying something about James Charles, and people will be ask them why they don't like James Charles, and I promise you they're going to bring up that tweet. They are going to bring up that tweet. I don't know. I've never seen a scandal or a tweet stick to someone as long as that has stuck to James Charles. But I guess in James Charles' defense, this will be the worst thing that James Charles does in his career. Every other thing that James Charles gets involved in is kind of not as serious as that tone deaf and racist tweet. Everything else really doesn't compare to that moment. He does nothing to that degree. So that's why maybe people have held on to that longer than they have held on to anything else that James Charles has done. But anyways, James Charles gets labeled as problematic from the jump, and people don't mess with James Charles. There's a clear divide. The people who like James Charles and the people who do not like James Charles, because you have that tweet, then you have everyone who says he has nothing but white privilege working for him, because you got to keep in mind, he's getting all these fans and he don't know how to do makeup. Once again, I think James Charles would admit he did not know how to do makeup when he started in the YouTube scene. So you have this clear divide, people who like James Charles, people who do not. But James Charles continues to grow. I feel like this is around the time where James Charles really gets a team around here, and this is the first time where we see James Charles using his skills, because James Charles immediately starts to get in other people's videos. You start to see James show up with Tati. You see James show up with other people, and that makes James Charles grow. So James Charles starts to grow also as a beauty influencer. He's doing really well as a beauty influencer, but I think the reason why James Charles has been able to rise is because of this right here. You gotta know when the ship is gonna sink. You have to know. YouTube is all about trends. YouTube is all about who you know. YouTube is all about being a part of what is hot. You gotta be what is hot if you want to grow. If you want to grow, if you want to be as big as a James Charles is, you gotta know when something is hot and when something is not hot. And I don't know if James Charles himself made the conscious effort to do this, or James just by chance this happened. But you see James Charles take a little bit of a pivot, and James Charles starts to try his hand in non-beauty related content. So he's still doing things that have to do with makeup and that have to do with like being a beauty influencer, but he's not doing the type of content that most beauty influencers are doing. Most beauty influencers do first impressions, they do hauls, they do monthly wrap-ups, they do just little things like that. That's the name of the beauty influencer game. Favorites video, they do things like that. And I think very quickly, instead of James Charles being a beauty influencer who was trying to show you how to do makeup, he became an entertainment channel. He became a channel that was for entertainment more than he was a channel for beauty tips and all of those things. He became, I'm going to just entertain people with makeup. And I think a lot more beauty influencers would be at the space that James Charles is at if they pivoted when James Charles pivoted. I think a lot of people stuck to what got them a lot of views. A lot of people stuck to doing the monthly favorites, doing product reviews, doing first impression, doing PR unboxing, doing things that have to do with the PR that they receive instead of trying to make entertaining videos. And I think a lot of people jumped on the entertaining beauty influencer videos very late. I think because before, to be a beauty influencer, you did not need to have a personality. Like, looks got you a long way. Looks got you a long way. Especially if you was white, you got a long way with just being something to look at. Like, you didn't need to have any type of personality. Your videos didn't need to be funny. Like, nothing. People just kind of came for you in the makeup. Like, and you weren't giving very much. But that was going to fade. And I think James Charles jumped while the jumping was good. He realized that people not going to sit around and just watch makeup videos for the rest of their life. You have to give people something to want to come back to. And James Charles was able to do something that like people wanted to see, because even people who I remember, because this is around the time when I really started getting on YouTube, people who didn't like James Charles would be like, I don't really like him and I know he's problematic, but he makes good content. And I think that's what James Charles really prided himself on. James Charles was making good content, good beauty related content, when a lot of people weren't. Like, you knew, even if you weren't into makeup, you knew who James Charles was. And that's where I think what separated James Charles from his peers. But another thing you have to understand that's going on behind the scenes, because I want to be clear, James Charles is still in scandals. James Charles is the scandal king. James Charles would stay in a scandal. And they weren't like random scandals like a Jaclyn Hill scandal, her products are bad and nothing like that. It's just random stuff James Charles would get in trouble for. Like random small things here, small things there. James Charles is apologizing about this, apologizing about that. James Charles is doing this, James Charles is doing that, but he wasn't really in anything big. So James Charles is kind of he's using scandals to his advantage, because let's be clear, I said this about Gabby Hanna. Gabby Hanna's career would be in a totally different place. People would see Gabby Hanna totally different if she embraced being problematic. James Charles embraced being problematic a long time ago. There are some people who just have to embrace being problematic. Like, hey, some of y'all not gonna like me, but there's people who do like me, and what are you going to do? And James Charles does that well. James Charles embraces the problematicness. James Charles knows some of y'all going to like me, some of y'all not going to like me, but at the end of the day, we move. At the end of the day, we move. So James Charles is going through scandal, but he's still growing. And James Charles is growing a big head. but James Charles is continuing to grow. This is what you see James Charles do, where I think James Charles takes a page directly out the Kardashian handbook. Remember early in the video, I say James Charles takes a page out of another group of people who stay famous. When you are someone who you want to remain relevant, you have to, and you don't have anything that's like, if you exist in the social media space, you're not always going to be the thing that is popping. You are not. You are going to have to attach your things, your stuff, to people who are more popping than you to keep yourself relevant, because it is just hard to remain relevant. It is just hard to remain big and everyone wanting to come back, because there's always something that's going to be newer and there's always something that's going to be shinier. And James Charles, if you look at James Charles's videos, James Charles knows who to collab with. When James Charles started hanging out with Emma Chamberlain and the Dolan twins, he knew what to do. That helped James Charles' career significantly. I believe him going in with going in with the Dolan twins and Emma Chamberlain and making that content that they were making, that helped catapult James Charles into where we see James Charles now. Because James Charles took two people, we'll consider the Dolan twins as one person. He took two fan bases, combined them, and added them to his, and that gave him millions of subscribers. Emma Chamberlain was the hottest thing on the block. The Dolan twins, hot. Everyone these two people were hot in the streets. And James Charles was there, but James Charles was not as popular as those two people. Maybe James Charles was more known, but James Charles knew that these two groups of people have all types of fans. They have all types of fans. They're new, they're shiny, so how about I attach myself to those people? And he quickly starts making content with these two people, and they start bringing in more and more fans. And the Emma Chamberlain, James Charles, and Dolan twins trifecta is hugely successful. Their videos are doing huge numbers. Go look at their going to Vegas vlogs, and they're giving each other gifts, things they're doing so well. And this is what James Charles does well. James Charles does not put himself in a corner and be like, I don't want to be around any influencers, I'm too good for that. James Charles knows who is hot, and he attaches himself to who is hot, and then he knows that he makes good content. So he takes his good content with the people who are hot, and it gives him relevance. It keeps him relevant, and it keeps him growing. So his audience never grows stagnant. Because his audience can't grow stagnant. If I'm doing videos with the most popular people, it can't grow stagnant. And as James Charles continues to grow, people start coming to James Charles to get some clout, because they don't even realize how James Charles attaching himself to other people is making people want to attach themselves to him. Because at the end of the day, that's kind of how big time social media influencing work. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. So people were scratching James Charles's back, helping him stay relevant and with the cool kids and what's popping. And so the people who were kind of older wanted to be attached to James Charles. And that's how you see a bunch of influencers who has been in the game way longer than James Charles want to come on James Charles' channel. You'll see celebrities who are starting makeup brands or who just want a little bit of clout coming on to James Charles' channel. James Charles is huge because James Charles cracked the social media game. He understood how to go between alliances and how to go between certain avenues to just gain more and more and more. And then Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson decided to do something skeezy, and that brings us Bye Sister. Throughout all of this, I always say this. People always ask, Kenya, how did you get successful on YouTube? It just so happens that I realized it was anti-James Charles season. Anything that goes up must go down. And I realized it was anti-James Charles season. And I knew the rumblings in the jungle. Did I know that a big part of this was because Shane Dawson, Jeffree Star, and Tati Westbrook were plotting? No. But I knew it was anti-James Charles season. James Charles was huge. He was huge. James Charles was doing so well. He was at the top of the game, and rumors and stuff were going around that James Charles was kind of full of himself. James Charles was feeling himself, and you could tell by the way James Charles acted that James Charles was he was feeling himself. James Charles was popping. What can you do? And so when I made my video about James Charles ticket prices, because those are the type of scandals, when I say James Charles was in scandals, this is what I mean. Like, people would get mad that he was charging too much for tickets. People would get mad. A huge thing that bothered people. Do y'all remember when it came out that the woman from Marlene from Makeup Geek was saying that someone was charging $60K to do a sponsorship, and James Charles was like over there saying he wants to make a whole documentary on Netflix and all this stuff. Like, James Charles was feeling himself, and a lot of people had issue with it. And so when I put up my video, people already were mad at James Charles. People were looking for a reason to dislike James Charles. So me making a video talking about James Charles ticket pricing, it was just anti-James Charles season, and that's why that video did well. That is honestly the name of the game. It was anti-James Charles. People were looking for negative things about James Charles, and I was talking about his ridiculous ticket prices. So when Bye Sister came along, James Charles needed to be humbled. And I don't mean James Charles needed to be humble as in like I want James Charles to be humble. James Charles can do whatever he wants. But people want more for you when they feel like you are touchable. Learn that. That's why when someone goes, people lift people up, and the minute they get really high, they try to tear them down. People always want you to be accessible. And James Charles was becoming unaccessible. He was working with celebrities. He was just gaining millions of subscribers. Like, he was doing crazy. And so Bye Sister, there's so many videos on Bye Sister, we won't get into it, but Bye Sister humbled James Charles. James Charles was kind of brought back down to reality, and I don't think James Charles realized, or maybe he does, Bye Sister helped James Charles more than it hurt James Charles. Because yes, the first day was probably terrible, like, oh my gosh, these people lying on me, but once that was done and James Charles put up his retort, James Charles was a sympathetic character. You saw James Charles humanized. James Charles was immediately humanized, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we've seen James Charles knocked off his pedestal. So now that James Charles has been knocked down, the only option is for James Charles to be rebuilt. And I think him being knocked down allowed him to be rebuilt better, because you get a more humble James Charles. I think it's noteworthy to say that James Charles post Bye Sister, a little bit more humble, not trying to advocate for why influencers should make $60K off brand sponsorship, not doing that. He's actually more for the people. Like, James Charles is really not doing what he was doing before. James Charles, I think, was young and a little naive before, not realizing, like, yeah, they give it and they can take it away quite quickly. I think post Bye Sister, James Charles really appreciated his platform and realized, oh, I need to present myself as a better person, and that's how I grow. And I think that's how James Charles came out in the end in Bye Sister, because James Charles put out his retort to them people lying on him, and then he let it go. We know what happened to the rest of them by not letting it go. James Charles went through that, and he let it go, and he moved on, and he moved on as a better person. And I think that really helped James Charles, because a lot of the things that people were saying about James Charles kind of went away after Bye Sister. Like, people felt like James Charles got his comeuppance. He went through that, and now, oh, we can kind of get off James Charles's case a little bit. Because even me, I have videos like, y'all kind of picking on James Charles a little, because before it was fun to pick on James Charles. A lot of people would pick on James Charles, but I think after Bye Sister, it was like, okay, he's just a kid, you know? He's just a kid trying his best. And then when you learn eventually that all them little raggedy people was plotting to take him down, it's just like, okay. But James Charles, after the Bye Sister, he spends his time recovering, and he recovers well. So what really makes James Charles rise even more. Like, I don't even think we've seen as big as James Charles can get, because James Charles picks his scandals carefully. James Charles is always going to be problematic. I think being problematic helps James Charles. It keeps his name in your mouth. Like I say, he takes a page directly out of the Kardashian handbook. Him being problematic going to keep his name in your mouth. So he going to keep being problematic. But what James Charles is doing with the people of TikTok, look at what he's doing. Whenever someone is doing well, 9 times out of 10 they end up in a James Charles video. And you think, oh, James Charles is opening up his platform to, up and coming talent. Not realizing these people are popping. James Charles needs to remain relevant. So why not collab? That's what's so good about what James Charles is able to do. People don't even realize they're scratching his back, that they're keeping him relevant when they come on his channel, because all the people who are fans of that person who is up and coming or just got popping comes to James Charles' channel. They find James Charles, they stay with James Charles, and it keeps James Charles fresh. James Charles understands how to remain fresh. Right now he's using the people from TikTok to stay fresh, aligning himself with them in order to stay popping. And who does that exact same thing? The Kardashians do that exact same thing. Anytime you see someone up and coming in any industry, I promise you the Kardashians are going to try to attach themselves to that person to try and remain relevant, because it works. In the social media space, it works that way. It's able to keep you relevant by doing that. And that is why James Charles continues to rise. James Charles knows when to pivot. James Charles knows that you can't stay doing the same exact thing that you have been doing for a long time and think it's going to help your career. You're going to have to keep, if you want to be as big as someone like James Charles is, you're going to have to keep going. James Charles, he's working harder. James Charles is just working harder. He's able, of course, there is a lot of privilege that comes to being white and on social media and able to exist in this spaces. Let's be clear. The fact that James Charles was even able to make a name for himself to begin with is in huge part because he is white. But James Charles is able, he's doing what a lot of the girls aren't doing. He's staying up longer and he's working hard and working faster to get those things. So yeah, James Charles, and a huge thing, and a lot of people can take notes from this, James Charles never lets a scandal fester. He does not let a scandal fester. James Charles nips it in the bud. He says his apology and he moves on. Either you not gonna take it or you gonna have to move on. And that's how James Charles keep going, because James Charles understands his fan base of kids don't care. His fan base of kids do not care. And that's how he's able to do it. He's not sitting there. He didn't waste a year focusing on Bye Sister like a lot of other people would do. A lot of other people would still be trying to explain Bye Sister. Another thing that shows you James Charles is playing chess, not checkers. A lot of people would have laughed in Tati, Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson's face. I would have. A lot of people would have laughed in their face. Like, you dummies came together to plot a whole plan and it failed. It backfired in all y'all faces. I'm up here and y'all down here. How it feel down there on your knees. A lot of people would have done that, but James Charles did it because James Charles sees that there's a bigger goal here. Like, he knows that from Bye Sister, he gained a lot of people seeing him as humble. A lot of people saw him humbled, and it actually helped him. It helped a lot of people who were like, on James Charles. And a lot of people didn't even know who James Charles was and learned who he was through Bye Sister. Like, it keeps him, the scandals keep him relevant. He knows how this game works. So that is how James Charles is able to rise. Just notice the little things that James Charles does that these other people do not do. The people who have downfall videos that they do not do. And that's how James Charles just grows and grows and grows. He takes Charlie's fan base. He takes this person's fan base and this person's fan base. And it just grows him and grows him and grows him. They think he's scratching their back, but really they're scratching his back and he just grows. Anyways, that is the end of this video. If you'd like to see more of me, hit me up on Patreon, which is As Told by Kenya. Hit me up on Instagram, which is As Told by Kenya _. Love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.